Happy Halloween, everybody! So the Dark Age was a time period that took place after the collapse of the Roman Empire, the western half that is. So a bit of backstory. Up to the year 284 CE, the Roman Empire was suffering through the crisis of the 3rd century, in which, to put it mildly, everything sucked and the whole empire was tearing itself apart. So anyway, when Diocletian became the emperor of the Roman Empire in 284 CE, he brought a certain level of stability to the declining empire. His most famous action was to split the empire into 2 pieces in order to govern it more effectively. This worked as a temporary solution, but in the long term, the 2 pieces grew further apart, to the point where they essentially became 2 different empires. Fast forward 200 years. It is now 476 CE, and a bunch of barbarians from Germania, under the command of Odoacer, have broken into the city of Rome and dethroned the emperor, causing the whole Western Roman Empire to die. So what happened next? Well, for a long time in Western Europe, trade, learning, and art flourished under the rule of the Roman Empire. But now that Rome was gone, all of that diminished, and the Dark Ages began. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, many Germanic tribes capitalized and settled in the freed-up real estate. One of these tribes was the Frankish tribe, which settled in northeastern Gaul. In 481, Clovis became the king of the Franks, and he was important for 2 reasons. The first being that he conquered a bunch of land, and the second is that he converted to Christianity, gaining him a new ally, the Pope. By 496, all of the Franks had converted to Christianity, and by 756, 260 years later, the Franks had carved out a territory in central Italy called the Papal States for the Pope to personally rule. The next important Frankish king was Charlemagne, who gained the throne in 771. Charlemagne's name, by the way, was Latin for Carolus Magnus, or in English, Charles the Great. He went on to conquer many territories where he converted the conquered people to Christianity. In 799, a group of rebellious nobles forced Pope Leo III to flee Rome. When the Pope asked Charlemagne for help, Charlemagne took his armies, seized Rome, and restored Pope Leo III. In return, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans, declaring Charlemagne's empire to be the Holy Roman Empire, the true successor to the Roman Empire, much to the annoyance of the Byzantine Empire. To control and protect his empire, Charlemagne appointed powerful nobles and lords, who would govern local regions and provide soldiers for his armies. He also appointed royal officials called Missi Dominici to make sure that justice was being carried out, the lords weren't corrupt, the roads weren't full of garbage, etc. Charlemagne also made notable contributions to education. He set up libraries all across his empire and established a massive school in the city of Aachen. In these establishments, scholars would translate the Bible along with all sorts of ancient Latin documents, which would become textbooks for the next 700 years. This would later be known as the Carolingian Renaissance, but as you will soon see, it would not last. Charlemagne's empire would end shortly after his life did. Charlemagne died in 814, and since his son was incompetent, his grandson split his empire between themselves in 843. West Francia would go on to become France, East Francia would go on to become Germany and take on the legacy of the Holy Roman Empire, while Middle Francia would go on to die. So here's where feudalism comes in. After the fall of Charlemagne's empire, people could no longer rely on central governments to rule and protect them, mainly because of weak kings. At the time, land was the main source of wealth. Since land was often used to pay people for their services, large landowners had power galore. A new system, feudalism, evolved from this. Major landowners, such as the king or powerful lords and nobles, needed people to help protect their property, so they gave fiefs, or parts of their land, to a vassal, a less powerful lord, in return for loyalty and military service to the more powerful lord. Soon the people began to rely on feudal lords for protection instead of the king. This moved more and more power to the feudal lords, away from the king. The peasants, or serfs, lived on manors. A manor consisted of a castle where the lord lived, and surrounding lands where houses and fields of the serfs were located. The serfs were farmers, bound to their respective manors. They would work on their lord's manors, and in return, keep some of the food they grew. If there was an attack, a serf could also get refuge in the lord's castle. This system was very hard on the peasantry, but at least they survived. So that's feudalism. Now let's talk about the next important aspect of medieval society, religion. By 476, the dominant religion of the Roman Empire was Christianity. After the fall of Rome, there was a divide in Christianity. In the east sat the Orthodox Christian Church, which was centered in the city of Constantinople and dominated mainly the Byzantine Empire and Far Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, in the west, there was the Roman Catholic Church, centered in the city of Rome, the capital of the Papal States. The Catholic Church grew extremely powerful in Western Europe, dominating the peasants' everyday lives by building positive relations with powerful feudal lords, even further diminishing the already limited power of secular kings. The Catholic Church needed to maintain its power, so it excommunicated anyone who tried to resist its influence. Then, the Muslims conquered the Holy Land. This was terrible news for both churches, and it was especially bad for the Orthodox Church because the Rashidun Caliphate and soon the Umayyad Caliphate were now threatening the Byzantine Empire. Despite their opposing relations, the two churches both hated the Muslims more than each other, so when the Byzantine Empire asked for help, the Pope launched a crusade, and the Christians retook the Holy Land for about 50 years. The Christians would many times again try to retake the Holy Land, but always to no avail. Although the Crusades failed to retake the Holy Land, they did achieve something else extremely important. They established trade between Europe and the Middle East. When Crusaders returned to Europe, they brought goods from the Middle East, which the Arabs obtained from Asia via the Silk Road. The demand for these goods, such as spices and silk, rose by a lot. This raised the popularity of a new occupation, merchants, who soon formed a new social class of their own, the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie built towns and port cities such as Venice and Genoa, which soon became very powerful. These new cities looked to the kings for protection, increasing the monarch's power, and money soon replaced land as the main currency, taking away what gave so many lords much of their power. These new cities paid taxes to the king for protection, rather than to the lords. So while the lords had land, the kings had cash, so the kings became more powerful than the lords. Moreover, the Black Plague reached Europe and killed 1/3 of the population. Peasants rebelled against the lords, and people lost faith in the church. Soon enough, there was no longer a need for feudalism.